notice number 7. Motion to be moved by the member for McMahon, Assyrian people.
And I call the member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I move the motion on the Assyrian people as circulated on the notice paper. Mr Deputy Speaker, this House has heard before about the plight of the world's Assyrian people, the plight that has had generations of violence, of oppression and indeed of attempted genocide. This situation worsened following the fall of Saddam Hussein. I remember celebrating with our local Assyrian people after the fall of Hussein because it was felt that brighter days might be ahead. But alas, that was not to be the case. There were, it is estimated, 1 million Christians in Iraq in the year 2000. There are now 150,000. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, that oppression and violence which has lasted for generations continues. Beyond 2003 to 2010, at the massacre at the Our Lady of Deliverance Church, which was a terrible, terrible event. And there have been ongoing attempts by the Assyrian diaspora around the world to get attention for the plight of the Assyrian people and to get a homeland for the Assyrian people in Iraq. And again, we celebrated in 2016 when the Iraqi government agreed in principle to a homeland for the Assyrian people. But alas, it has not yet occurred. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to today bring particular attention to the House to the plight of those Assyrians in northwest Iraq who have fled ISIS-inspired violence in the past and are now being subject to bombings by Turkey in relation to the dispute between Turkey and the PKK. Those Assyrians who live in the Dohuk province and in villages like Zakko and Bersiveh, these are people who have been driven out of other towns and cities in Iraq, particularly around 2014 with the rise of ISIS. The Arabic letter Noon was put on the homes and the doors of the homes of Assyrian people, and they were told to convert or face murder, and they had to flee. And accordingly, they fled to villages where they are now being bombed. And regardless of the rights or wrongs of the dispute between Turkey and the PKK, it is not the fault of the Assyrian people. And this motion calls on the Turkish government to cease the indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas because it is the Assyrian people who are paying the price in that dispute. And this motion does call for that to occur, and it is urgent that it does occur. For too long, the Assyrian people have been a footnote, been not thought of in disputes in the Middle East, whether internal in Iraq or between countries in the Middle East. And that must come to an end. The Assyrian people, the indigenous people of Iraq, the people who have given the world so much, deserve better. In the brief time remaining, Mr Deputy Speaker, I do want to touch on a few other elements. I want to take this opportunity, I think it's appropriate in the House, to pay tribute to the patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East, Mar Gerverges III. He's been the patriarch since 2015. He's a much-loved figure by Assyrians around the world, including in Australia. I met him on his first visit to Australia as patriarch. I met him more recently when he came to Australia to consecrate Mar Benjamin, the Bishop of Melbourne, and Mar Awarham, the Bishop of Western Europe. He is a good friend of Australia and a wonderful leader of Assyrians around the world. I was particularly honoured and pleased to meet him on my visit to Iraq in Erbil and to have lunch with him, as was my advisor Ninos Aaron, and to talk about the plight of Assyrians in Iraq. I paid tribute to him because he has announced, rather unusually for a patriarch, his retirement from the office due to ill health. And the election of a new patriarch will occur later in the year, and we look forward to welcoming that new patriarch after their election to Australia, I have no doubt, fairly early in the patriarch's reign. I also want to take this opportunity of paying tribute to Assyrian leaders in Australia, particularly Hermes Shehen and David, who lead the Assyrian National Council. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, they join us in the chamber today, together with other leaders of the Australian Assyrian community. It does not matter what the organisation is called and what letters go into the organisation. What matters is what's in their heart. And what's in their heart is leadership of the Assyrian people. And I welcome them and thank them for their generations of leadership of the Assyrian people. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to thank also the member for Fowler, who will second this motion, and his long-standing commitment to the Assyrian people in his time in this House, which will, as he's announced, soon come to an end. But I know the Assyrian people will want me to thank him for his leadership, and I also thank in advance those honourable members opposite for what I expect to be their support, and thank them in advance very genuinely for their support of the Assyrian people as well.
And I thank the member for McMahon. The